Welcome to the Coach's Table Podcast, where coaches come to grow personally and professionally through real-world application and online education.
What is going on, everybody? Happy Friday. May is getting hot. It's getting beautiful. And I'm excited for summertime to roll around because there's so many things that happen in the summertime. Baseball's in full swing right now. But guys, today's guest I'm very excited about. We are going to dive into a new field that everybody's asking questions on, that everybody's trying to figure things out as we go. And it's going to be very enlightening. I'm very excited for this one because we've had a lot of strength coaches on, which are fantastic. And we're also starting to now go to other places with other people that we work with on an everyday basis and learning how to communicate with them, learning the skills that they bring and how we can collaborate with them to help everybody and to help win more is such a huge component of it. But before I introduce him and before we get started, guys, if you get value from this episode, that's how we work as a peer value exchange. Share the show. That's all that we ask. If you get educated, if you get entertained, and if you get encouraged while you're listening to this and you go, oh man, that's an aha moment for me, share this with a friend, put this on your social media, share it with somebody. That's the only way the show grows. Would appreciate that very much. We are dropping the full-length episodes on YouTube, so go subscribe to the YouTube aspect and drop a comment below. We're growing rapidly on YouTube as we are on Spotify and Apple. So without further ado, today's guest works with the Cleveland Guardians professional baseball and sports scientist, was a former strength coach, now turned sports scientist, and has developed a lot of skills to get him in the position that he is, which I'm super excited to dive into. So Mr. Ryan Faer, how are you, man?
Good. Thanks for having me, Kendrick. I am glad that somebody's excited for the summer. We are up over 100 degrees here in Phoenix, Arizona. So this is usually the time where we all start thinking about October, November when the cooler weather comes around.
It's so funny. When you get into one season, you start thinking about the next season already. I'm in Mississippi. If you can't tell, I'm sweating. So if you're watching online, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see me sweating because it's hot down here too. And it's humid. I like the summer. I like it hot. I hate the cold so much. I really hate the cold, but I love the snow.
Yeah, I'm a Floridian, so I've only ever known hot, so I can deal with the summer. But I will say this, I've gotten deconditioned to the humidity. We almost got rain last night. We didn't actually get rain, but because of that, it's like 10 or 20% humidity here today. So when you get that in like 100 degrees, like you feel like it's really humid. But I know I'm just being soft because I'm not used to higher humidity climates anymore. But anyway, yeah, I mean the summer's not that bad here. We try to make light of it, you know.
Yeah, I mean the Arizona weather is just. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous all year too. Like 75 and sunny, dry. I have some friends that live in the Phoenix area there, and I love going to visit them because one, the views are amazing. I'm a mountain guy rather than an ocean guy, so the views are amazing. So it's like so beautiful to like constantly see that everywhere you're at, and then the weather, like you really can't beat it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. If you can survive 4 months of like really, really hot, hellacious type temperatures, the rest of the year is beautiful. So when I first got into professional baseball, like my first year interning and then my first year full time, I only spent summers here in Arizona, and then I would leave to go to an affiliate or like I finished my internship. So people would always say like, oh yeah, but it's so worth it. But I would only do like, May, June, July here. And I was like, there's nothing that is worth 120 degrees. But then when I finally got my first like fall and winter and then you get spring and you're like, oh yeah, okay, I can do 3 or 4 months of this. Like no problem. It's worth it. So we're getting to the hot point now, but also baseball's rolling. So it's a good time of year.
It's a great time of the year. I mean, professional basketball is getting ready to kind of wrap up here. So we had some, games last night, and then baseball's really under the way. College baseball is going. It's a fun time because what I love about this time is everybody seems to be like outside, and everybody seems to be more active, going to do things. And I also love that the sun doesn't set at 4 p.m. And so that's a huge aspect of it. It's so much fun. But yeah, there's a lot of great things going now. The summer's awesome. Go to the lakes. One thing maybe you could help me with this is in Mississippi, we have a bunch of alligators. And growing up in Florida, I was like, yeah, I'm going to be at the lake all summer. And they're like, nah, you don't go swimming in that because there's alligators. I've never seen one in real life. I've never, because I've been in the Midwest my entire life, right? For the most part. And somebody sent me a picture of an alligator on that was sunbathing the other day. The freaking thing was massive. And I was like, so I can't even fish because what if they just come right up on you, you know?
Yeah, no, even though I grew up in the Southeast, I still I wouldn't go in our lakes and our rivers, not very often anyway. Like you go
Yeah.
tubing or you go water skiing or you do all those things and like, yeah, you go in, but like if I fell off the tube or whatever, like I'm scrambling to get back to the boat because I don't do sharks. My
Mm.
beach or our beach back in, that we would go to back home is New Smyrna Beach. It's the shark bite capital of the world.
Oof.
You get accustomed to them being there. Like I'm totally used to being around sharks,
Mm.
I don't love it, but that's fine. But I don't do alligators. So like, we have a couple man-made lakes out here in Arizona, like in my area. I
Mm.
go to it all the time because I get to see water and I love that. But
Yep.
there's nothing living in it basically. So that brings me a lot of comfort because I'm not a Gator. I am a Florida Gator. Like I went to the University of Florida,
Yeah.
but I cannot stand the thought of being in a lake with one. So I get that.
Yeah, me either. And growing up in the Midwest, the home of 10,000 lakes, Minnesota, we never even had to like worry about that. Like there's just not there. There's no sharks. There's no gators. There's no snakes. It's just like cool lake, go jump in it, go swim, go tube, go fish, and stuff. So it's an adjustment, but, speaking of that, you said you spent several summers in Arizona as an intern. For those that don't know, how did you get into professional baseball? You were a collegiate strength coach beforehand, and did a very similar strength coach track, right? Where you have one place for 1 year, for whatever reasons, maybe it's pay, personal life, progression. You go to the next job, and then you're there for a year, same thing, probably pay, personal life, progression. You go to the next job, but you've been, we were talking off air, but you've been where you're at for 7+ years now. Kind of one, how'd you get into pro ball? And then two, what's kind of kept you where you're at?
Yeah, I'll try not to be long-winded on the background, but I do
Sure.
think my journey in is a little unique on the front end. So when I graduated from high school, I'd spent so much time in baseball, my whole life in baseball, and all I ever wanted to do was play Division I baseball. And once I went into my senior year, and I knew that the writing was on the wall, that wasn't going to happen for me. I
Mm-hmm.
immediately started shifting to like, okay, how can I stay in baseball? How can I stay in sports?
Yep.
And I knew that I loved training, so like everybody else that somehow gets into S&C, like they fall in love with that side of it. I graduated from DeLand High School in DeLand, Florida, and then immediately started coaching there as a JV assistant baseball coach. And I went to school went to university like in the area.
Sure.
So all during my undergrad, I volunteered as a high school baseball coach and slowly, started running warm-ups and then, because I was the JV pitching coach, but it was like, okay, now let's do a dynamic warm-up instead of a circle stretch, hey, can I train the guys in the weight room? Because at that time, there were no high school strength coaches, at least in our area at public schools.
Sure.
So over 4 years, kept doing that and progressed, but then also got an internship at Stetson University when they started their S&C program. And then going into my senior year, got an internship with the LA Dodgers. So came over here to Glendale, Arizona, spent the summer with them, and then came back home, finished my degree the last semester, and then, was very fortunate where the Dodgers, they needed to hire somebody. They interviewed me for a full-time position and luckily, walked across the stage at the University of Florida and then jumped right into pro ball with a full-time job. So it was super, super fortunate
Nice.
for that opportunity. My story after that is, basically like you said, spent a year here and there. For me, it was more on that personal side. Like I got homesick really, really easy. Like that was something that it took me a lot of years to overcome. So I took the job with the Dodgers about halfway through the year, like just knew I needed to get back home.
Mm-hmm.
So after the season was over, finished my contract, went back home. From there, jumped back in, ended up with the New York Mets for parts of the season. And then my high school, DeLand High School, actually came back and said, hey, would you want to start our strength program? Like this is a public school, you'll be a PE teacher on paper, but you'll live in the weight room. You'll train the athletes, start a program for us. So I went and did that, full-time job with benefits and everything.
Yeah.
Back home sounded perfect to me.
Yeah.
And I did that for about a
Right.
year when I got a call from at the time, he was the newly minted farm director for the Cleveland Guardians. He's now vice president or assistant GM within the organization, but called me, basically I was so unassuming. Like, he was asking me questions about training young athletes. So we talked for an hour, and then he asked me, well, where do you see yourself in 10 years or 5 years or whatever? And at the time I was 24. So I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know that I'm going to be at my same high school 10 years from now, but I also don't see me jumping from high school to high school. So I don't know. That's when he brought up the idea of like, hey, we're looking for a role where we have an S&C coordinator that would be based out of Arizona. Most teams only have one S&C coordinator that oversees everything. We're going to have 3. You would be based in the academy. You would help oversee that. We would have an affiliate level coordinator, and then we'd have a Dominican level coordinator, and you guys would work together to help oversee the department, or to shape the department. And the thought of being able, like, I knew I was going to be moving away from home, but the thought of at least being able to stay in one place and maybe plant some roots was super exciting to me. And then just once I came over and interviewed, I couldn't say no to the opportunity. So that's how I ended up here, to the point of, what made me stay.
Yeah.
There's something as I went through with the interview process, and I interviewed with probably 20 people over the course of 2 days. Whether they said it directly or indirectly, I kept hearing the CLE, collaboration, learning, and a commitment to excellence. And obviously CLE, you could also say, is an abbreviation for Cleveland. But I kept hearing it. And even if they didn't literally say it, I kept just hearing those themes. And it very much aligned with things that were exciting to me, things that I would want to be around and be a part of. And so when I took the job and had spent some time out here, once we, the first year was tough. Like, all I said is, okay, I'm going to do my 2-year contract. I'm going home. I can't be away from home. I just got to do my 2 years. I'm going to go home.
Yeah.
But once it took me 18 months. And when I got to the 1.5 year mark, I finally said, you know what? I think I could sign another contract here. I enjoy working with these people. I enjoy what we're doing, the collaboration, all of the learning, what we're trying to achieve. So then I said, you know what? I'm not going to sign a 2-year deal. I'm going to sign a 1-year deal. Just want to make sure before I go betting on myself here.
Sure.
So once we got 3 years in, then it was like, okay, well, I have nowhere I want to be else that I want to be. I'm excited to be here. And then then you sign a 2-year deal, and then you look up and it's been 5 years, and now, I'm in year 7 at this point. So, I guess the crux of it is, they enticed me with the values that they said they stood for. But then when I got here, I realized that we actually live those values most of the time. No place is perfect. No working environment is always the best all the time, but the majority of the time things are really awesome here. Our people are great, and the values that they say that they want to live up to, we live up to them the majority of the time. And that's what's kept me here, I would say.
And I think that's a huge component, right? There's so many people that, myself, yourself, that, you go to some place and you're like, oh, this is going to be great. And then 6 months, 8 months into it, you're like, I'm itching to get out of here, or this isn't what I thought it was, or I was sold a bill of goods and that's not what it is at all, or whatever the case may be. And so you're like, it's like always in the back of your head, like, I'm looking for the next opportunity. I'm looking for the next thing. But there's got to be such like a peace of mind to be like, okay, I'm here. I'm good here. I'm getting, paid well. I like where I'm at. I like the people I work with. I like what we're doing. There's a lot of things to do outside of work too. And like just kind of putting a lot of things together to say, I don't have a reason to be looking or to up and move. Or if you do, there's going to be, some other stipulations that come along with that. And I think that's a huge aspect to that. And hey, like, let's live up to what we say. So if you're going to tell me this is how we're going to operate, let's operate that way. It's no different than getting in a relationship. Like, this is who I am. This is what I value. Well, like, when push comes to shove, do you value that? And like, do you stay true to that? And of course, nobody's going to be perfect, but hey, if you recognize 90% of the time we're doing what we say we're doing, it's an organization you want to be in for a long time, right? Because we've all probably been in an organization where the opposite, it's the opposite. And then you're like, whoa, hang on. I thought you said X, right? But that's awesome, man. So how did you make the transition, or when, or why, or all of the above, to, instead of being a strength coach, I'm going to go the sports scientist route? You've learned coding. You've learned some other platforms, skill sets that are, particularly important. What kind of made you make that change?
Yeah, it's an awesome question because it wasn't by choice, and I don't mean that I wouldn't have chosen it, but I didn't know it was even an option. But
Mm,
I think it was out of necessity for the organization. You know, my first 5 years here, we had a lot of people wearing the sports science hat in some way. Like everybody was doing different sports science things. And there were times where like that's kind of how I was referred to, is like, oh yeah, he does the sports science stuff with certain things, not everything, but
sure.
the big one for me, like I've always had an affinity since I've been here, towards like workload type stuff. Like I find that super interesting. It's numbers based. Like even though didn't have a ton of background in it, I just find it, I guess, the most interesting of all the different aspects of sports science and performance training. So naturally, like I started taking on some of those things or helping push some of those things forward on the minor league side. We did bring in somebody to consult for sports science in the early days. They then became our major league sports scientist. We brought in more technology. We were asking coaches to make more decisions based off of the data
Yep.
we're collecting. Everything was building around the sports science process, but we didn't have a formal way of managing sports science.
Yeah.
And so at the end of my 5th year, the organization did a restructuring for S&C in a lot of the different departments, and then created a sports science department for the first time. And so our then consultant, now Major League Sports Scientist, but also now our director of sports science, Jonathan Freeston, is at the helm of the sports science department. And then we took several members from different departments, mostly S&C, and brought them into our sports science department. And so we now currently this is our 2nd year of having a sports science department. We have 3 of us that are called sports science analysts.
Okay.
And then we have a director of sports science, and the two other folks besides myself that are serving as those analyst roles are former strength coaches. But the idea was to fill that need of like, okay, we're getting to that tipping point where we have so much data. We're asking so much of our staff. We need dedicated people to help us run assessments, to help, perform analysis on that data, to be a support tool to other coaches, to be able to take the time to explain the data to players, all of those things, so that again we can support each stakeholder as we move towards like better performance on the field, but also the development of our players.
Right. And like, I think that's awesome. I think that is becoming more and more of a natural transition, if you will, because strength coaches, especially at organizations that may not have the financial means to just add a sports science department, like, this, but we're all multi-hatted anyways. Whether if you don't have a dietitian, you're doing the nutrition stuff, you're obviously doing the strength stuff, you're potentially helping them with psychological things. You wear so many hats, not just I'm the strength guy or the conditioning guy or the speed guy. Like you're all of the guys or girls consistently. And so, that skill set of looking at data, analyzing data, and then the ultimate, so what, the decision component of it, making decisions because of data or because of our intuition with data, tends to be more of a natural process for a lot of strength coaches, because we look at a lot of data. And so that's also the central question, because a lot of people, because sports science is so new, are asking the questions of how do we even have what is it, right? Like a lot of people are like, what is it? They know what it is, but it's not like defined. But they're also asking like, what do we do with it, right? Because there's so many of them that want to have it, know that they maybe need to have it, but don't necessarily know like, what do we do with it? And the data needs to make a decision. And I think that's a huge thing that everybody needs to take home is like the data needs to make a decision. Sometimes no decisions, but 9 out of 10 times we want it to make a decision. How do you guys kind of maneuver that to say, when we're looking at data, if we're going to hang our hat on these decision-making processes, how do we kind of figure that aspect of things out as well?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think you hit on a really important point, is that this stuff is naturally happening whether you have a sports science department or not. You're part of, in my mind, and speaking mostly for myself, but I see sports science as being almost just like the scientific method. Like you're trying to ask and answer really great and meaningful sporting questions. That's the way I look at it. And then it's the scientific method that helps you do that in a systematic way that gets you valid and reliable answers and helps you build the system so that you can answer those questions. I would say, and I'm not, definitely don't take this the wrong way, I'm not trying to pick apart your words, but I think it's an important distinction. And again, speaking to like, I think how we try to look at things, especially in an environment where, as crazy as it sounds, if you've seen Moneyball, you know how numbers driven baseball is, but on the physical and the performance trading side, that's actually still relatively new. So you are having to kind of ease your way and ingratiate yourself to tradition, because baseball is such a tradition driven sport. We have to not step on toes as we do it. So the data, and I get what you're saying, the data making the decision, but for us, a piece of it is actually allowing or helping others to see that we don't want them to think the data will make the decision for them. We want them to feel like the data is there to support their decision making. And I know it's semantics, and so I'm definitely not picking apart your words, but it's important for the staff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I agree with you. It's like because the data is so objective, I think intuitionally speaking and from experience, like when we see things, we kind of come to a decision already, but we use the data to help support that case, if you will. Not that it's only data driven, because I don't believe that, but like the data supports our intuition and education and experience. And it just is like another layer, if you will, to help quantify what was once unquantifiable, maybe.
Yeah, undoubtedly. And to help speed up that process, for me, a lot of it's just about giving people more confidence in their decision making. And my hope is that especially as we go, as your sports science process, if you will, evolves, is you hope that you're doing things that are already informed, and whether they're evidence-based or they're, by the literature, or they're evidence-based by your own internal data you've collected and the experiences that you've had. You hope that you're doing things well, so that the majority of the time, sports science is kind of in the background. Again, supporting decision-making, giving people more confidence. Like they might come to me and say, hey, what do you think of this progression? And I say, hey, I'll run some numbers on it. I'm hoping I just give you two big thumbs up. And the majority of the time, that's what you're hoping for, is that, hey, that looks great. I don't see anything to be concerned about. And then you hope that, 5% of the time, you might have to raise a hand and say, hey, like, I'm seeing something funny here. I'm not sure if you're seeing it. Just want to bring it to your attention. But again, at the end of the day, is leave it for us in this setting, is bringing them that information so that they can still ultimately make the decision with that data that you're providing them and those insights you're providing them. You're not, saying, hey, the data says we have to do this. It's, here's what we're seeing. Here's what the numbers show us. Go make the best decision possible. And if there's further inquiry from the staff or whoever, hey, what would you do? Like, that's I really love, like, my background in S&C is like, I've lived a lot of the practical application of the data we've collected, and now I'm handling the data, so I can give some insight, but I try not to let that be where I'm coming from. It's more of, here's some information to help support your decision making.
Yeah. So I think you explained it way better than what I can explain it. Because I agree with you. It's the aspect of let's present it and understand it, and to the point, like 95% of the time you're going to say, yep, what we thought is what we are going to do, or what we believe to do, or what we would do anyways, which is just like a good validation component of it. And the confidence that you're saying, I think that's a huge component, is like helping the decision makers be confident in the decision that they're going to make or potentially make, right? Just from an additional layer, just from other things that we now have available to us, and can articulate them. And I think that's a huge component of it. Because people do want to be reassured, like, hey, that's a good decision. I'd make that, or whatever the case may be. And same thing with like our programming, like, are you seeing things increase or not? Like, you want to be assured, like, hey, yeah, that's a good idea. And I think that's awesome, because that's the entire purpose of it, a little bit, and that's what makes it valuable as well. So going to that aspect then, what does the collaboration aspect look like? Because a lot of people struggle with this. How do you guys collaborate with not only yourself, you got people in different geographical locations. You also have strength coaches that are there with you, in person, but then you also have other departments that you collaborate with as well. How does that process look for you guys? Because a lot of people were in silos too many times, right? And there's not the collaboration aspect. There's not the, hey, I'm seeing this. Are you seeing this? Or people don't want to feel like they're stepping on somebody else's toes. How do you guys kind of go about that in a shared understanding manner with in your department and then with people outside of your department that are still in your organization?
Yeah, and you hit on an awesome point to make there. I think one of the greatest challenges of baseball is just the scale and the range that we have to cover geographically, like even our own department. So there's three of us in the director, so let's call it four to cover
Sure.
our major league team, four full season affiliates, a rookie ball team here in Arizona, a developmental group here in Arizona, rehab, and then two Dominican Republic teams. So you're not, for most of our locations, you actually don't have a sports scientist there all the time with you,
Right.
with the staff, with the players. Fortunately, here in Arizona, like my first year in this role, actually, I covered half of Arizona, and then I traveled to our low A affiliate in Lynchburg, Virginia, once a month. And so we figured we were kind of like, I don't know, we were compromising all the way around. This year we tried something a little bit different. I'm just covering all of what's happening in Arizona. So it's really neat for me is I actually I work in the S&C office all day. And if I'm not in the S&C office, then I'm on the weight room floor. So all day I'm around our strength coaches, around our medical staff, around our players on the field as well. But it's never just in an office or remotely. Whereas we have other staff members, because they're having to travel between affiliates, they have different challenges. In terms of collaboration, though, I think it just comes down to communication. And that is like literal, like face-to-face communication and how we go about that, whether it's daily meetings that are cross-domain, making sure that everybody has a voice heard or a seat at the table. Like those are really important. But I think also the communication that comes not face-to-face, whether it's virtual. So using your messaging streams or platforms that you do use. So even if we're not connected in person, face-to-face, we're still almost running a similar cadence of like, hey, we're still sending the same, holistic performance team. We're still sending everybody on that team the same information, whether we're there or not. We're asking the same questions. We're jumping on the phone when we can. So the consistency of communication in some way, I think, is really important. To go then beyond, I think, is just, it's baked into the culture that others have built here. I don't think I could put like a ton of tangible. I don't think I could put together a lot of like tangible action items, but it just starts with meeting more often with more people, and then those people that are meeting and are working together, having an open mind. I think it's just as important that the people are in a mental headspace and at a point in their life and their career where they're open to hearing diverse lines of thinking, maybe getting some opposite opinions of their own, like being able to work through those things. I think is really important too. So a lot of it's about the people that you bring in, and as you work through those things, then understanding that collaboration is going to get super messy. And when I first got here and was in a collaborative environment for the first time, messy to me meant like maybe you'd have some disagreements and like it could get ugly and like that would happen. But also messy, it sounds crazy, but it could also just mean like it's not messy enough, if that makes sense. We're to a point now where we have so many systems and processes, and we have so many people that actually are just doing a job. They're not wearing 6 hats, that sometimes it just seems like, hey, I do this and you do that and you do that. We bring this information to the table. We've all brought everything. Okay, now we just go. Instead of like having that like, oh, let's chop it up a little bit. What if you wore the dietitian hat for a minute, even though you're not the dietitian? What if, hey, sports scientist, what if you wore the baseball pants for a minute, so to speak, and thought about the swing?
Yeah.
Sometimes it gets hard to have those moments, which is where I think the gold is, when you start to get really evolved in your systems and your processes. I guess the better way to put it, instead of it being messy, because it's just that it's not messy enough, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Very streamlined, right? And, maybe you can kind of loosely talk about this because I think a lot of people want to get to that point, right? They want to get to the point where maybe you're doing one job and you do it really well, right? Maybe you do two jobs and you do those two jobs really well, right? But then what you don't want it to be too messy where you're wearing six hats and you're just running around like a chicken with your head cut off. If you can, I mean, but what does your streamlined process look like though? When we're talking about, hey, I'm doing sports science, or I'm doing just strength, or I'm just doing just training. So that's, speed conditioning, strength, weight room stuff. How does that look for you guys? Because maybe a lot of people can take this and then apply it potentially where they're at. And I know you got to be a little careful, but what does that look like? Because I think that's what everybody wants to get to, right?
Yeah, for sure. I'll do my best to answer this, and let me know if it's not really speaking to the question
Sure.
itself. We are to a point where we have people that they're there to serve, maybe not just one, only wear one hat, but like they're the
Right.
expert in one specific area. Just like, hey, I did a lot of workload related things or conditioning related things,
Mm-hmm.
as one of the three S&C coordinators before, while somebody else did a lot more of the strength programming and all those things. Now it's like, hey, this is what I do. I don't do sets and reps anymore. But I think a big part of it still is you allow those people to be the experts in those areas and to bring those insights to the table. What you need, what I think I've seen go really well at certain places and in talking with others, so it's not just what we're doing, is you
Mm-hmm.
always bring it back to player centered care though. And so if you can align your system or your process or how you do things around impacting the player and then work backwards from there, then it
Mm-hmm.
almost doesn't matter who's wearing what hat, but the more specialized you can be, the deeper you can go in each one of those areas. Because we have a dietitian, he can go, a mile deep in dietetics and nutrition. We have sports scientists, we can go a mile deep there instead of having the strength coach
Right.
who's the dietitian and the mental performance coach and the, you know what I'm saying? But at
Yeah.
the end of the day, we bring that investigating we've done for each one of those
Sure.
players as we've done our review. When we sit down with the player and we start to think through how do we apply what we've learned about that player, we then bring everybody together again, whether it's literally and we do an actual team meeting to talk about that player, or if we
Mm-hmm.
just are all communicating, working towards establishing a player plan or a player program. So whatever that your system is, if it
Yeah.
all drives something for the player, you can work backwards. So this isn't necessarily what we do, but just to take an
Sure.
example,
Yeah.
hypothetical, if you're trying to create an Excel file for each player that documents their progress over time, it also has their
Mm-hmm.
strength training programs in it and some goals in it. If you know that is what you're trying to inform, it doesn't matter whether you're the strength coach doing it all or if you have a bunch of team members doing each component of it. We know that we're ultimately trying to drive that programming that lives in that document, and then the application of that, of course, with the player,
Of
so that
course.
we can
Yeah. Yeah.
fulfill them.
Yeah.
So we have the tool in place. We know what we're each bringing to the table. We collaborate together. We check off that plan, and then we implement it. But then again, if there's just one of you or two of you doing those things, you know what area you're covering, you know where you're investigating, you investigate those things, then you take all of that back to the plan for the player and then the application with the player. I know that's super loose in
Yeah.
general, and I'm just not sure if
Sure.
it's speaking to your question, but I guess again, to sum it up again, is know that you're trying to make the impact on the player. You're putting a plan of some sort together for that player.
Mm-hmm.
And then now you have the stakeholders that are involved in figuring out what is best for that player, whether that's one stakeholder or 20 stakeholders. And we wrangle all that information together to then push through that funnel.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, it does answer the question. It's, I think it's hard for people to realize that when they are a mile wide on things and scratching the surface compared to you guys are a mile deep on something, on one topic, two topics, maybe three at max, right? But like you're a mile deep, and I think that's where the value really is at, because we've all been there or are there currently where you're a mile wide on everything. So, you know, a little bit about nutrition, you know, a little bit about sleep, you know, all that stuff. You might be the expert in the S&C component, but all the other hats you're wearing, you're just scratching the surface on them, not because you don't want to know, but probably because you don't have the time. And because of that, you know, it's hard for them to think of a different way, because right now they're just keeping their head above water, right? And I think we've all been there, or are there currently. And so with that, if you could, when we're looking at sports science or learning that, because you transitioned the skill set to learn due to the organizational needs or interest as well, where did you go to learn about that? Because I think a lot of people find it interesting and intriguing, but may not know where to look. Like, where did you go to learn about sports science? Because the stuff you put on Twitter is fantastic. It's awesome. I really enjoy it. And I think you do a really, really good job with that. But where did you find the resources, the skills, the education? Because this is a skill set that's just not impactful for today doing sports stuff, but it's literally a skill set that can get you paid, you know, everywhere else in the world.
Yeah, no, again, another good question. I think a lot of the ones you're asking that, you know, I keep saying that over and over, and it's a good question, but I think that these are ones that can help make an impact for people like,
Yes.
you know, like in this situation who are trying to figure out like, hey, I'm interested in this, but how do I learn it? One of the most helpful things for me, so I guess that's why like my affinity for this stuff, like I guess I never knew this path was there for me, but then once it was there, it was like, oh, that kind of makes sense. I've been tracking my own data for years, just to various levels. And then in the last 2 or 3 years, even before this role, like, you know, I fill out my own wellness survey every day. It's like 2 questions, but like I do that every day. I wear an Aura ring. I got into cycling pretty heavy for several years, and I have a power meter on my bike. I'm quantifying everything, my lifting loads. There was a time, you know, probably 10 years ago, I was tracking everything I ate. So like for me, I was interested in that. So I was collecting that. And then it became a huge data set for me to start asking questions. And then when I asked those questions, I had to go find ways to get the answers.
Sure.
And as I was doing that at the same time, because of the job change, like I had to bring that same approach to things we were doing here. Like if I needed to, like, oh, I'm really interested in this. Well, now I don't just have my data. I have data for hundreds of athletes over all, I mean, like insane amounts of data that I can go parse through, you know, if I want to, and start asking questions. And so that becomes, to me, the data becomes a sandbox for whatever you want to build or try to do. So when I wanted to learn R, it was awesome. I had my own data to pull in. And at first I just pulled it in through an Excel spreadsheet, had 2 years of data. And I just said like, hey, actually first I just wanted to replicate one of my Excel dashboards. Then it was, okay, well, I want to see if there's correlations between this and that. I want to see if this data is clean. I want to see X, Y, and Z. What are the trends? And I use my own data to do that. So I guess going back to it is I would start to build your sandbox first and foremost. So, you know, maybe you don't train yourself, or maybe you don't collect data or want to collect data on yourself. No problem. You could start it a different way. I open-ended said, hey, I just want to quantify all this because I think it's interesting. But you could take the different approach, and I think probably a better approach is, I have a question, and I don't know how to answer it, but I think I have an inkling of what information I would need to answer it. So I'm going to start collecting data. And then I'm going to wait. I'm going to be patient, because unfortunately it takes a little bit when you first start.
That's the hardest part. Yeah.
It is the hardest part, is having the patience to wait maybe a whole season before you look back at that data. But now then you can start to try to answer those questions. And then you'll know, you'll have to do some digging, whether it's through textbooks or ChatGPT or Google or a buddy, you know, a colleague, or you call somebody and say, hey, this is what I want to figure out. You know, how do I do it? And I'll give you a perfect example. In the last couple weeks, like I haven't, because of how we do things here, I don't have to clean data very often, like a little bit of cleaning, but not like big extraneous things, outliers. Well, I came across a data set that I wanted to look into for my own thing, and there were a ton of outliers. Like, it was crazy. I had to go through and figure out using R, how do I clean that? It's something simple, but I just haven't had to do it yet. But I had the data to do it. I had the question. I went through, every resource I could to figure out the best way to do it. And then I gave that a go. So I could see, like, if I'm in a high school setting, like if you put me back, 2010, 2011, I'm coaching high school baseball. We had a coach, his name is Danny Light. He's still coaching in Central Florida. He's one of the best coaches I've ever been around, defensive mind. Before people were tracking a lot of the stuff that was happening in baseball, he had an iPad, one of the first iPads, and a stylus before there was an Apple Pencil. And he put a blank baseball field on there, like diagram. And he was doing spray charts by hand for every team. And he did it for seasons. And that binder was this big. And honestly, I think it's, looking back on it, one of the coolest things. And so he was shifting guys based off of off of what he had there. If I was back then, and like, let's go forward a few years, like, my question would be like, can we find a way to automate this? Can we find a way to maybe tease out things besides just looking at a spreadsheet, or a spray chart? Can we pick up on trends ahead of time? Can we have team meetings beforehand and inform the players of what to expect, as opposed to, oh shoot, this guy's coming, hey, to the left, to the 6 hole, So like that would be a good question back then. What kind of, what hitters traditionally hit the ball the other way in our district? Like, you could then you have all this data you've collected. Now, I wouldn't know how to take a spray chart by hand and figure out a way to make that actionable. But that would be a question that would take me down the rabbit hole to learn a skill to do that. Super long-winded, but hopefully an example of just having a good question and finding a way to solve it on your own, even if you don't have the formal education to go about doing it. Because I'll tell you what, I don't have a formal education in sports science.
Well, and see, like that. Okay, so to that, first of all, I thought that was a fantastic answer, because everything you just said, and then you crushed it with the back end too, because we're so when we look at skill sets, right? So in our field, we all know this. You go and you get your undergraduate degree, and then you go and get your master's, and through that you're a GA, and you do your unpaid internships, and yada yada yada. Cool. All right. Well, that's fantastic. Congratulations. Get yourself in the door. Make a very low income, right? However, that's not what gets you. And I'm going to use the word paid here, but the skill that you're discussing here, that we are talking about, that is emerging of data analytics, sports science, coding, is you don't necessarily need a formal education degree from X university on it. You can, do self-education, which is highly advised. You can take certificates, or you can get certifications from like a Microsoft or an IBM or an edX Learn, or some of these other things that are out there, that you say, I am now developing this skill, which means I may not need a formal education in it, but I can still be extremely proficient in this. And I think that's something that, if you're listening, you really need to take that home, because what he's saying is like, I don't have a formal education. I just like it. So I spent my time learning about it, and now I have developed my skill set to where obviously he's been working for a professional organization to do this. And so I think we get so caught up at times on, I need a degree from X university, I need this. It's like, no, you don't. Just go and do it. Like, just go and learn. There's so many resources out there, ChatGPT being one of them. You could literally ask it to tell you the top 10 places to learn R, and it will list it to you and hyperlink it, and spend your weekends doing that, whatever, right? But I make this a big point because the skills that we learn are the skills that people need and want, and that's what's actually going to get you paid. Your degree, unfortunately, to a certain extent, nobody truly really cares about. It's your skill set that you're developing consistently on top of that, in combination with or without, but it's the skill set that you have that's really important. And that's what gets you that's what opens the doors. And I want people to really like take that in, whether it's a speed thing, it's a sports science thing, it's a Excel, it's a Microsoft Office application, everything about all of the Office applications. It's a Power BI, it's a Tableau, it's whatever the case may be. If you just go and like hyper focus on that, you can put yourself in a position where, you're doing what you really like and using your skill set, and you may not need a degree for that. But I just wanted to like make that a big point, because so many people get hung up on, I need a degree. It's like, you don't,
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good talking point, and it's one that's still pertinent to me because of my coaching experience starting at 18 years old and coaching year round. And I was in Florida, so like there's year round baseball. So I was able to be on a field in front of athletes from 18 to 22 every single day, which was awesome. It was like a fertile learning ground to be a coach. And so by the time I finished my undergrad, I knew who I was as a coach. Like, not saying I was a great coach, but I knew who I was. And that was very impactful for me. But I also I was able to, come right out of my undergrad and get a full-time job. And the years have gone by and I haven't needed per se a master's degree. So I kind of got around it, but there's still times where it's like, there's been multiple instances where I've gotten very close to starting a program, because there are things that I want to learn that I think having somebody having a formalized structure around the learning would help me. And to me, this role I'm in now in sports science has been great, because I look at it as like a practical master's degree for me, so to speak. I'm learning from people, my peers, but also our director. Like, there's something that in S&C, at least in my experience, that's different than sports science and being on the other side, if you will. And that's having a little bit of patience and being a little bit more deliberate in the steps that you take. At least in the role that I was in before, it was always about the here and now, getting things done for players, actioning things, going off. And a lot of times it means going off of gut or going off of the data, but just the first look at the data, not maybe always going through the fullest line of inquiry to make sure you're getting the most, whether it's the most valid and reliable assessments, the most accurate data, really vetting things out. So learning to just slow down and take some time. That's something that like every now and then I still bump into now in halfway through my second year in this role is, I still sometimes get that feeling of like, oh, I just want to move forward with this. But then I realize like, oh, there's something I didn't learn 8 years ago when I should have been in grad school taking a research methods class. I didn't do that. I've never had to use it. Okay, now this is the time that I really need to be thinking about that as we start a new pilot project that of something we've never done before. I just wanted to start collecting the data and get rolling. we actually need to do X, Y, and Z before we ever get to that point. So, there's I think there's both sides of it, but I don't. That's why I love the point you hit on is I don't think you have to go that route, especially like you get to that point. If I got lucky where the organization wanted to move in a sports science route and that opportunity was there for me and I had interest in that, so it worked out. But like, had I been sitting in that same role going like, I think I want to get into sports science, and let's say that opportunity wasn't available here, I could go back to school, or I could have done a lot of the same things that I've been able to do over the last year or two of just trying to be inquisitive, trying to get the, practical application of getting your hands dirty with data and problem solving for yourself, which means not only just doing it on your own, but trying to find the right resources and people to help you do it. So I think there's just multiple ways to get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And I think the number one thing is go and do, right? Like if you want to learn something, go and do it. And I love the aspect of like, you're getting a practical application. I mean, it's not, this is a make-believe data set. Like, no, like this is legit data from legit, and I think there's a huge component of it. I talk to people a lot, but a lot of my friends say, I'm thinking about doing this. I'm like, go do that. Like, just go do it. Like, whatever it may be, go do, start it, learn from it, learn throughout the process. And I think that's really important because I think sometimes we get so hemmed up on a barrier and it's like, just go do, go learn. Entrepreneurs have no official degree, right? I mean, there are entrepreneurship degrees out there, but they have like the only way that they learn the most is just going to do, right? And so, okay, so I've had this from my experience. When I collect data with my athletes, the athletes start to really own the data. And what I mean by that is they ask questions every single day. Hey, coach, how many calories did I burn? How fast did I run? What was my total distance, et cetera. And what I've noticed is from a psychological perspective, sometimes it can push them one way or the other, whether that's you need to eat X amount of calories, you didn't travel as far. Sometimes they correlate like I didn't travel as far. In their mind, thinks that they didn't work as hard. How do you kind of communicate that with the athletes to get them to understand from like a mental standpoint or psychological standpoint, or maybe some to a degree of mental health standpoint? Like right now, we're just this is what the data says. It doesn't necessarily mean anything yet, right? But some of them I've noticed it's like, coach, I didn't run very far. I didn't run very fast. It's like, that's okay. Like we're good, you know? Do you kind of see that as well?
Yeah, for sure. And I live it as well. Like for the longest time, like I live and died off of every aspect of my data in multiple ways, right? Like if I got a low recovery score, it's like, oh, I don't think I'm going to train today. Or if I have a high recovery score, but I feel terrible, it's like, well, I guess I got to put in a big work day, even though I feel terrible, you know? And on the other end of it, of just like getting hooked to numbers, especially like in cycling, it's like you look at your workload. They use a metric called TSS in cycling, or training stress score. And they basically look at acute and chronic workloads. They give them different names, but they look at acute and chronic workloads. And you want to bump, everybody talks about having a big TSS or this big chronic, or fitness, they would call it. Your big fitness is having a lot of chronic workload. So as soon as you, like, if you have a lower week and you start to see your fitness start to dip off, you get this fear of like, oh no, like I got to go ride it. I got to do an extra ride this week to bump it back up.
Yeah.
So I've lived all aspects of that myself, but then also I've seen that with athletes. So it's such a great talking point. I think my personal approach, I like to remove and strip any emotion from the data, at least early on with the athletes. Once they understand, well, you know, you want to start with the education piece, right? Like get them to understand the metrics. But then once they know what they are, then strip the emotion out of it. So if they had a really good output on an assessment that day, like we do get super excited for our regular tests, right? Like our ones that are like semi-regular. So monthly assessments that look at if you're making progress. Heck yeah. If you do well, we're super excited about it. If you're down, we probably don't get super low about it or disappointed, but we do say like, hey, like we may want to check on this again, or, you know, let's recheck this next week, or whatever the case may be. But either way, we try to get, you know, outside of those big victories, we try to strip away any, you know, negative connotation around the data. And then we also just, you know, want to present it as objectively as possible, and then answer any questions that they may have. I think we're then like, you want them to stay like hooked on it, and not hooked on the data, but you want them to be engaged in the process, because the more engaged that they are with the data, the more engaged they're going to be in testing or in training and all the aspects where we collect that data. So you want to drive motivation, right? So a big piece of it is still giving them something that gets them salivating. And so what I've seen over time that's super helpful, if you're not going to live and die off of one data point for them in the moment, most of the time, if you can still contextualize it somehow for them to say how that ranks versus other athletes, how it ranks for themselves over time, or some way of saying like, you know, even if you got to like, and this is where you start to get really, the more nimble you get with explaining your data, the way you can almost always reframe something to where it's not a massive negative that they need to stress over, is you can zoom out and see longer trends, or you start to tie different data sources together. So like if an athlete sees that one variable's down, like, so for example, if you were to do like a med ball throwing test of some sort, and you have an athlete that's lost a lot of weight recently, like they needed to lose weight, they may not chuck that med ball as far, especially if they're using the same weighted med ball. So when you present them with a test that just says, hey, like yeah, your med ball throws are down. But if you can tie that to something else to say, but hey, man, you've lost 20 pounds. You actually shouldn't be able to throw it just as far.
Right.
So just remember, those are things that you can do to kind of buffer those situations where you do have to maybe present the athlete with maybe a negative outcome or just an outcome that is just less than ideal. And on a daily basis, we're doing this. So I think like you get a little bit more agility the more that you do it. But stripping the emotion from it early on is really important. Of course, educating them is a huge piece of it. Right. And then I think contextualizing it in some way so that you still like, even though like, okay, we're going to pull the emotion out of it, but I still want you to see how valuable this is. And I still want you to get excited to hear about it and to see where you're tracking over time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a huge aspect is like you said, pulling that emotional component out of it, because sports is very emotional, right? I mean, sports is emotional, training's emotional. When we love the emotional side of it, like we love people showing their emotions, showing their personality, getting excited. But what you want, what you don't want, what you're saying is like those peaks and those valleys, right? Like, and zooming out, I think there's a great piece of advice is like, if you have one bad test, that's okay. Look at it in the context of the 50 tests we've done and we'll be okay, right? And I think a lot of people come into that where back in the day, if you will, when we did 1 rep max tests, once a quarter, it's like, well, if they had one bad test, like then like the athlete will struggle to be like, well, are we doing good things? Because you just don't have the number of tests to validate it over a long scale.
100%. And a lot of times the answer truly is for us like, hey, not your best test today, but we'll want to see you repeat this. And if in fact, like the next test is down too, we might have some interventions that we can take to probably make this better. We're going to adjust your programming, or you're going to see this in some of your training, or don't worry, I'm going to have a conversation with your S&C coach about this. Sure. That way, again, it's like, okay, even if they are a little like, that's interesting. Why am I so down on this? Now they at least know that you're doing something about it too. But also you're not panicking, saying like, hey, I want to confirm this. Let's wait a little bit till we get a second data point that doesn't look great. But still celebrating the victories too. So like, I think it's we get super high when guys do well, but then we also like, if they don't do so well, it's just presenting where they're at right now, helping them come to terms with that, and then maybe potentially plotting out a plan forward.
Yeah.
And then if you're involving them in that plan as well, now you've pivoted that engagement with the data to now engagement to their own plan. So now they're heavily invested in something else with their development still.
Great points. And what you said there, I mean, I agree with you. And people, not because you just glossed over it, but what it allows us to do is ask the question, once we see it a couple of times, is something else going on? Right? Let's say we're doing a counter movement jump on 4 stacks or whatever, right? And let's just say peak force is down or whatever the case may be. Okay, cool. Like, you get to ask more lifestyle questions and like, are you sleeping okay? Are you eating food? Are you hydrated? Do you have stress? Like, it allows us to kind of, I use the analogy of like peeling that onion back more so we can hopefully get to that root and be like, oh, like, yeah, well, it's because you're getting 3 hours of sleep because you're staying up on your phone watching TikTok. Like, hey, like, can we help you with this? Yes, we can. Okay, great. Right. But it's a lot of times just peeling that onion back more and more and getting to it allows us to ask more questions, which I think is a great thing.
Yeah. That's I think when things are going right, for me personally, is when you get a test or an outcome, or you're seeing something, whether it's in their workload data or their wellness, that allows you to maybe flag it with a larger audience that can then each dig in and provide some context. And sometimes that means going to the player too. Like, hey, why did you, hey, we're seeing this from some of your wellness data, why would that be? And they might provide the context of, oh, I realized that I wanted to start marking myself as an 8 all the time instead of a 10. I was like, oh, well, if you're always 10 and you go to 8, that flags as a big change for us. But if that's your new normal, I'm glad I know that now. Yeah. Or there's the other circumstances where it's like, yes, all these measures are pointing to something might be going up. Right. I don't need to solve it alone. I don't need to alert the athlete. That athlete still needs to go out and pitch tomorrow. Like they need to be in a good headspace. I'll let them know, hey, this outcome's down today. We'll see what you get next time. But then we all start to investigate and dig in. And then we again, you go back to that collaboration pieces. We can all come back together and say like, oh yeah, I dug in here. Like this is what we're seeing, or I dug in there. This is what we're seeing. Or you might come to find like just a bad test,
Yeah.
just a poor outcome, can't truly explain it. And the next day they come in and they do an awesome job. And
right.
Okay. I don't know what happened, but
yeah,
we're still playing baseball every day,
Yeah, they're human beings. They're allowed to have bad days too. So
right, exactly.
We forget that. But anything you want to wrap up on, Ryan? I'll give it to you, and anything you want to touch on, man.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to take a second. I try to do this on every podcast or topic, or sorry, every conversation that I have, kind of in a public forum. It's just to touch on mental health a little bit. I'm not going to take up a ton of time here or get on a soapbox. Sure. But I just think it's really important to try to normalize the topic, and it's becoming more normal, and it's more normal than it's ever been. But I know 5-10 years ago, like the thought of talking about depression and anxiety was almost taboo in sports and really just in society in general. So I just want to, let anybody know that's listening that, if you're going through something, you're not alone. If I'm not going to go into my backstory here, but if you want to know my journey with mental health, just go through my social media and you're going to see a lot of those stories there. Go through my blog. I've been there. I'm sure most people listening here have been through something and been through some sort of hardship that has stretched your mental a little thin. So just know that you're not alone, and it's okay to go out and get help. It's okay to ask people for assistance and support. I've been able to get through my mental health journey over the last decade or so, dealing with depression, anxiety, disordered eating, things like that, by leaning on other people and letting them support me as I go through those things. And it's helped me get to the other side on all of those things. So just want to take a moment to touch on that. But otherwise, I've really enjoyed this conversation. It was a lot of fun. And if anybody wants to talk, any more on this stuff, they can always reach out to me.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for bringing that up. I think that's a huge aspect, especially in the world of sports, in my background in the military world as well. Like if you need help, go get help, go talk to somebody, right? The worst thing somebody could ever do is, take their own life. And I would never want that to happen. So if you're struggling, if you have struggled or are currently struggling, reach out to somebody, go get help. You're not weak for that. That's a huge misconception. You're very strong for that. So go do that. And Ryan, I want to thank you for the conversation. The insights, what you guys are doing, how you're doing it, how you got there, because this field of sports science is so new, right? And so we're trying to answer so many questions. So I want to say I appreciate you for your time. If people want to reach out to you, where can they reach out to you at?
Yeah, for sure. I'm on most major social media. So Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. I would say professionally and for some of the content I'm putting out there, Twitter's probably the best place. Yeah. So just if you look up my first and last name there, I should be one of the only people that pop up. So go ahead and follow me there. But you can also, reach out to me directly once you're on those platforms, and I'd be happy to have a conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I want to say I appreciate what you're doing. I have about 5,000 more questions for you. So I look forward to having more conversations with you as well. And just want to say, acknowledging what you're doing as well, because I think it's fantastic. And maybe you can tell, but I'm very excited for sports science, and I'm very excited to learn more about it. So I appreciate that. Guys, if you got anything from this episode, do us a huge favor, share the show. Okay. You heard it at the beginning, you hear it all the time. Share the show. We get to bring on great people like Ryan, to give us insight on a lot of topics to help you and to save you time. And do us a huge favor, share the show. That's all we ask on Spotify, on YouTube, Apple. And then reach out to Ryan and let him know what a great job he did. We got more guests coming on as well. But Ryan, thank you. Very excited for what you guys are doing. I'm excited for more conversations with you as well. And just want to say I appreciate your time, man.
Yeah, thanks, Kendrick. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Catch you guys on the next one.